Hi everyone, it's time for Cocktails and History. That's where we make a cocktail and then we do a little history that's somehow related to it. Today we're going to make one of the classic cocktails, an old-fashioned. And then we're going to explore the amazing history behind the most important ingredient, not just in the old-fashioned, but in pretty much any cocktail. And that is ice. Yep, ice has a history. So, first, the cocktail. Take a glass, ideally one with a little bit of a history theme to it. This is a pretty cool one. It's got the frontispiece from Moby Dick on it, a quote from Moby Dick, and an emblem here with showing the Spanish coin from Moby Dick. And to that we are going to add 2 ounces of simple syrup. Then we're going to add 3 dashes of Angostura bitters. Then we're going to add the good stuff, which is some bourbon, 2 ounces of bourbon. In this case, some pretty good stuff, Whistle Pig, Piggyback, I highly recommend. And then we're going to add a cherry, and then an ice cube. More about this ice cube later. Now stir it. This is not a shaken cocktail, this is a stirred cocktail. And then we give a little spritz of the orange rind, pop it in as a garnish, and we are good to go. Now, the all-important taste test. Whew! That's an amazing cocktail. No wonder why it's been around for about 200 years. All right, now that we have our cocktail, it's time for a little history. In this case, the history of ice. The history of ice, it's way more to it than you might imagine, begins with a guy named Frederick Tudor. He is one of the great entrepreneurs in American history. And way back in 1805, here in New England, where I'm sitting right now, he looked around and said, you know, there's just enormous quantities of ice. And if there's a way that I could harvest it and ship it and store it, I could make millions. And that's exactly what he did. He encountered a lot of doubters. And this is what he wrote in his diary. People believe me not when I tell them I am going to carry ice to the West Indies. Now that's confidence, man. There were 2 keys to Tudor's success. One, with the help of a friend, he invented a dual blade cutting device that was pulled by a horse across a lake or a pond, and it cut deep grooves in the ice. And then men came along with iron bars and they pried loose each of these blocks of ice, uniform in size, and now Frederick Tudor could harvest ice on a mass scale. The second key to Tudor's success was that he discovered that sawdust, which was cheap and plentiful throughout New England, sawdust was an amazing insulator. So you could take ice blocks, pack them in an ice house, and put sawdust in between them, and those ice blocks would stay fresh and melt very little for months and months and months. And then he could do that on ships. You could pack ice into the holds of ships with sawdust, and that's how he ended up being able to take ice all the way around the world and have it not all be all melted by the time he got to port. Genius. In 1833, Tudor sent 180 tons of ice, 16,000 miles from Boston all the way to India. Very little of the ice melted, and Tudor made bank. And so it went. In 1856, Boston shipped 150,000 tons of ice worldwide to 43 countries. And Frederick Tudor was a very rich man. And here's a bar bet you can win every time. What was the number 2 export from the United States in 1860 by weight? Cotton was number 1, but what was number 2? People will guess all sorts of things like corn and wheat and lumber. And you just let them drop those answers and then you say, actually, ice. Gets him every time. Frederick Tudor's success meant that ice was soon available throughout the United States 12 months a year. And that had a huge impact on the American diet. Just think about the availability of fresh vegetables or fresh fish. And it also had a big impact on the cocktails that we drank. Bartenders realized that cocktails were far more refreshing when served with ice. And so they became that much more popular and ice became that essential ingredient. There's a whole lot more to this story, and I'll put a link in the notes here to a podcast episode I did about Frederick Tudor that has a lot more information about his story. It's one of the great unknown stories in American history. So from now on, when you drink a chilled cocktail, thank Frederick Tudor. Cheers. I hope you liked this little episode of Cocktails in History. If so, please like the video and also hit follow to keep up on all things history, not just cocktails, here at In the Past Lane. Thanks.